Okay, the first thing I have to tell you, oh, it's Barb again. First thing I have to tell you is I'm not really good with technology. So I'm attempting to do something that I wouldn't normally do. So we'll see how this goes. Um, my sister, Verna from Vay's Place, she has an excellent YouTube channel on homesteading. Her and a community get together on a live chat. It usually lasts about 2 hours. Very informational. Anyway, Verna suggested that I read my story, the one I've started, Tao's story, the very first one, on YouTube, not just a tiny bit, but the whole thing. So I'm reading you a very rough draft, just to let you know. So here goes. Tao's story by Barbara Hendrickson. I have to get to the first page first. Chapter 1. She listened to the discussion taking place in her mind between her mother and an MG who had descended to their realm. Tao had just awoken from her time of rest. Her sister lay beside her on the thick mattress, her arms and legs wrapped around Tao. She could see and hear her sister's dream also. She could hear other Meru going about their day in her mind. She loved the connectiveness of her home. Everything was connected in her realm: plants, animals, rocks, people, everything. It was a rhythm that played in the back of her mind every day, and it was comforting to her. It was rare that an MG would visit her realm, so she listened to the conversation with interest. MG were closer to the One and lived in the beyond. They did the bidding for the One in the circuit. They were like gods to the Meru who served them. For one to be talking to her mother, it must be important, she thought. It will be a difficult journey, the MG said, but she was made for this. We need her, for the light in her is strong. Tao listened, wondering who they were talking about. But, her mother began, she could tell her mother was frightened. She is just a child. Please, can't her training wait? She could hear the fear in her mother's voice, even though it was just thoughts, not verbal words. She sent her mother a warm burst of love. In her mind, she could hear her mother talking to the light being, so bright and full of love that it made her gasp. Tao, the being said to her, please come outside so as to not disturb your sister. She disentangled her sister's body from hers, kissed the top of her head, and laid her back on the mattress. Tao slowly walked through the round cottage to the doorway. There, she could see extra bright light shining just outside of it. As she stepped out, she covered her eyes against the brightness, even though it didn't hurt her eyes to look at the being that bobbed in front of her. It had no true form, just a floating ball of immense light. A teacher will come to give you the skills you will need to be a warrior. Learn from her. With that last sentence, the being ascended to the bright white sky above her. She followed the being up until it blended in with the sky. She wasn't sure how she felt. And Anji had just visited her and her mother to tell her she was to be a warrior like her father had been. He went missing on a world when her sister was still unborn. She was honored that an MG had visited her. She was excited that her path was chosen. Yet she was nervous like her mother. She took her mother in her arms in a tight embrace. She realized that she was just as tall as her mother, something she hadn't noticed before. She looked just like her. They both had the same blue hair, blue eyes, and blue skin. They both had short, round ears of the blue clan. The stripes on her mother's face were medium blue, where Tao's were a dark blue, almost black. Their bodies were both long and lean, unlike some who had thicker, more muscular frame. It'll be fine, Tao said aloud. The MG said I would be fine. He did no such thing, her mother said, as she tapped her on her rump. Now, go to market for some bread and don't stop at the pub to see that friend of yours. Tao laughed. Her mother knew her well, as she was just thinking about running off to tell her best friend. But, Ma, I must tell someone, Tao whined as she raised her hands above her head, then lowered them slowly, removing the dirt and sweat from sleep from her hair and body. She pictured her favorite tunic, light blue, to offset her eyes. It appeared on her body. It was loose fitting. It had no sleeves to hamper her movements, the bottom hem resting just above her knees. Her mother shook her head. You definitely have talent, her mother said. Now go so we can break our fast. Tao ran as fast as her legs would carry her, not because she was in a hurry, but because she could. She loved to run. She jumped over rocks and cottages alike until she came to the market. Hang on to that thought. I need something to drink. All the while, calling greetings to those she met or jumped over. There, she stopped in front of a stand where Keimer, the merchant, handed her a cloth sack full of goods. She knew that her mother would have contacted Keimer through the connection they all shared with her list of goods. Keimer was so named because he was a chimera. He looked as if someone had pasted the right half of a blue with the left half of a green together to make one person. Instead of blending like she was, the green and blue halves never melded. He was a thick, muscular being with one blue eye and one green eye. She loved the interesting looks of Keimer. He smiled broadly at her. Take this to your sister, he said, handing her a sweet stick. Tao smiled at him, took the sweet, and laughed when it turned into two. Take one for yourself, apprentice warrior. She could feel him beaming with pride in her. And MG had chose you. Wow. He lowered his head, shook it as he was thinking about how special a girl in front of him was. Just me, Tao said. Got to get back for Ma. Say hello to Mary for me, Keimer said. She smiled. She knew that had her father not charmed her mother, Keimer would have been her father. I will. She turned to leave, but turned back to face Keimer. Have you seen Tyrus today? Keimer shook his head. She turned to walk back to her home. She thought if she walked slowly, she might see him. In her mind, she heard him. This better be good, he said. You woke me. Without her even thinking about what happened at her house this morning, it was on the rhythm, the internal communication. I'll see you as soon as I can get away. Tao walked slowly home, feeling the spread of her news. 2 days later, she was instructed by the rhythm to meet at the warrior training grounds. It was just a little way outside of town. It consisted of a flat, open field with only a few small trees and bushes. Tao was a little nervous when she approached the grounds and saw Aaron was her instructor. Aaron had a little family and was not as joyful as most. Her love was felt in the rhythm, her appreciation for her home, but nothing else. She didn't contribute thoughts to the whole. Tao realized this when she was very young and saw Aaron with her father. It was as if she were disconnected, apart. This had frightened her, as that was the worst punishment a Meru could endure. Well, at least she did send love and some emotion to the collective, Tao thought. Her first week was spent learning to harness her love and the love she felt from the rhythm and direct it toward rocks, trees, and other objects. Tao thought this to be silly practice, but she did it without question. When love was directed at a rock, it enlarged as if filling with love. When a tree or shrub was focused upon, it grew and flowered. Tao loved Caillou berries, so she concentrated on a Caillou tree to make it bloom. It flowered and fruited within moments, the berries raining down on them. Tao lifted her face toward the sky, opened her mouth, and let the berries fall in. This only garnered a scowl from Aaron. Do you think this is a game? She scowled. She scolded. Isn't everything? Tao asked. Aaron sighed. It should be, I guess. She relented, but some things will not be so fun. Some of the things you encounter will want to disconnect you, to harm you. Tao gasped. Something or someone would want to harm another being? The thought was almost unthinkable to her. Negativity only grows when you add more negativity toward it, like anger or fear. The only way to fight it is with love and light. You, my child, have more love, more appreciation for your family and home than anyone I have met. Now learn to focus it, or you will die on other worlds. Tal became frightened, and the Caillou tree started to wither, dropping its leaves. See, that is an example. Fix it. Tao pictured the tree as healthy. She pushed love toward the tree. It not only looked healthy again, but flowered. Tao didn't know whether to be proud or to cry. At the end of the day, she was told to rest for the day and spend it with her family. She was instructed to meet back there at the same time in 2 days to begin portal lessons. 2 days later, Tao stepped through the portal she had just opened. She didn't expect the dizziness and disorientation that came with her first trip through her very first portal. Next to her, another, more stable portal opened. From this one, Aaron emerged. I'm impressed. A world on your first try, Aaron said. Now, let's see if your return trip is more stable. But, Tao whined, can't we explore first? Aaron sighed. Only for a moment. This world is inhabited by backward creatures that are unable to do magic. They had emerged into an area with trees. The tallest came to Tao's chest. She gingerly stepped, trying not to destroy any of the vegetation. She could feel the life emanating from them. When she reached a clearing, she looked back. Most of the trees had survived. She also noticed Aaron walking through the trees as if she were a fog in the shape of Aaron. How do you do that? That's for another lesson. Since we're here, tell me what you see. Tao turned toward the clearing and gasped. The grass here is green, the sky blue. It's so beautiful. And, Aaron questioned. Tao looked confused. Open. What do you feel? The trees are reaching for the rising sun. She looked up, noticing where the light had come from. They're reaching deep into the ground for water. They communicate with each other, with the grass, with the animals. Very good. There are animals in the forest, birds, mammals, all going about surviving. Yes, now reach out toward the drop off. Tao looked at the end of the clearing where the land gradually sloped down, a mere step for her. There, at the top of the grade, where it began to slope toward stood two tiny beings. They were looking down the slope, their backs at her. They were nervous, yet excited as if they had just done something they weren't supposed to do. She stepped closer to get a better look and crouched down. This caused them to turn to face her. The creatures only came to her mid-calf. They wore woven plants on their bodies. Their skin was a dull pink and tan hue. Their eyes, though small on the face, widened when they saw her. The smallest let out a horrific sound, a scream. Tao felt their fright, which confused her. She didn't wish them harm, so why were they afraid, she thought. The tallest of the two yelled something at her in a language she didn't understand before taking the hand of the littlest one and running back down the slopes. Tao watched them go, confused. She saw where they were headed, toward a bunch of piled stones with spaces in them. Tao stood, shrugged, and headed back to her instructor. What were those? Humans, little ones at that. Why were they frightening me? Because of your size. Are there others like them? Many. Are they all that frightened of us? No, we've helped them before in other places in this world. Okay, let's go back now. This time, Tao's portal was more stable. Just before walking through, she turned back to look at the piles of stones just beyond the bottom of the slope. Other humans were running about, some looking in her direction. She turned and walked through the portal to home. When they returned, she found her best friend Tyrus waiting for her. She could feel his excitement and his pride at her first portal opening. He himself had never tried and never sought out that skill. Tao was always a little more adventurous than he was. She saw his amber eyes glow with excitement. His skin, a tawny brown, almost glowed as much as his eyes. His smile caused the dark brown stripes in his face to turn upward from his nose. He threw his arms around her, embracing her in a tight hug. She hugged him back, then pushed him away at the sound of Erin clearing her throat. I still have to finish the lesson, she reminded him. You made it to your first world and back in one piece. I guess the lesson can be over for today. Erin gave praise sparingly, so Tao took that as praise. We will see you tomorrow. She gave a slight bow of respect before turning back to Tyrus. The sky is blue. Imagine, she said excitedly. There are trees there, but they're so small. She was giddy with excitement. And speaking of small, some tiny creatures that look like us, well, not really, were afraid of me. At that thought, he laughed. He couldn't imagine anyone being afraid of his gentle friend. Were they blue like you or golden like me? He was curious. She wrinkled her blue nose. Neither. They were kind of creamy with other colors on top. Did they have stripes? No, not on their faces. Then how did they look like us? They had a head on top with arms and legs. They used their mouths to talk. Well, scream anyway. Yeah, I'd be frightened if I saw you before I expected it. He laughed again, nudging her. It's not funny, she pushed him gently. They weren't even as tall as my knee. Maybe they were littles, he said, meaning children. I'm sure they were, but our littles are bigger than that at birth, she said. He laughed, thinking of a newborn walking and screaming at Tao. They began walking toward town. The landscape here was flat with a few trees. It was a safe place to practice opening portals just in case something went wrong. The dirt road to town was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side, but they walked on the grass beside the road. She looked at the bright yellow hue of the grass and the purple and orange flowers growing in it. She thought how beautiful her home was. She looked up at the white sky. It was brilliant white, always. It dawned on her that if the sky was blue, then it wasn't the one shining down on them, for the one was always bright white, pure energy. Tyrus, the sky was blue, not white. Do you think only part of the one shines through there? She asked. Tyrus shrugged. Why don't you go ask Wise Woman, he said. She thought that was a great idea, so she decided to do just that. Give your parents a kiss for me, she said as she started across the road and onto the grass on the other side. She looked up again at the bright white sky above, felt the warmth and love of the shining down on her. The one shining down on her. She sighed. As she stood outside the cottage of Wise Woman, she caught the faint scent of healing herbs. She was about to announce her presence when she heard a distinct voice in her mind say the word here, followed by a picture of a field just outside of town. She continued down the road to the place pictured in her mind. There she found Wise Woman picking herbs. I came here to ask about the world I went today, she said. I know. Let's go have some tea first. Help me carry this basket. Tao picked up the large basket of herbs and flowers sitting next to Wise Woman. Wise Woman herself had a smaller basket over her arm. They walked back toward Wise Woman's cottage. As it came into view, Tao felt a warm, welcoming feeling from the cottage. She almost dropped the basket to run inside before remembering her manners. Ander is home? She asked. She looked at her walking companion, who had a broad smile on her pink face. Her dark pink eyes danced with amusement. She held out her free arm for the large basket, giving Tao permission to run ahead. The cottage was made of large stones stacked perfectly on each other, with the only gaps being that for windows to allow the light in, and a large one for a door. It was round, as most of the cottages were in the village. She ran through the door to greet her father's father. Ander! She exclaimed as she burst through the door opening. She saw his smile light up his dark pink face. His pink eyes were larger than most Meiru's eyes, taking up most of his face. Tao jumped into his waiting arms. It didn't matter that she was a young adult now. She would always greet a grandfather this way. Child, you are not a little anymore. You are getting a bit heavy to catch, he said, laughing. You move stones the size of me with ease, and they're heavier than I. She slid out of his arms anyway, but not before kissing his cheek. They both giggled. Does that tea come with biscuits? She asked shyly as Wise Woman walked into the cottage. Today I made scones from caillou berries, Andrew announced. He went about setting a plate piled high with scones on the table in the center of the space. Wise Woman put her basket on her work table near the door. She pulled a teapot out of the cupboard, set it on a tray containing 3 mugs, and brought it to the table. It began to steam. Peppermint tea and caillou berry scones, Tao said. I think I've gone to the beyond. At this, both of her hosts laughed. It's only peppermint to you, Wise Woman said. For me it is caillou tea, and for Ander it is lemon. She winked at her partner. Lemon, thank you, my love. They all sat around the large table, which shrank to a more intimate table as they sat. Now, do tell us about this world, my love, Anders said to his wife. It didn't surprise Tao that Anders knew why she was there. It also didn't surprise her that Anders also knew about this world, as he has visited many worlds in his very long lifetime. The world is a young one. It was made by the One in the circuit long after our world was made. There were many creatures on this planet, but none of them were like us. We often visited this world. Then the Anunnaki visited the world because they wanted the gold. It is rich in gold. Because they couldn't or didn't want to mine, they made many creatures by combining their cells with that of the other animals. Tao gasped. Yes, they broke one of our laws, but not necessarily one of their laws. Each species, especially those not so close to the One in the circuit, have their own laws. So they made fish versions to mine the seas. They kidnapped Enkidu, who visited, to make primate versions to mine the land, and even jackal and other versions. The dog-faced ones are more on the dark side. The fish, well, they stay mostly to themselves now. The primate, land-based ones are the humans that you saw. It has been millennia since the Anunnaki abandoned them and left them all to fend for themselves. Tao gasped. And Kidu stay to themselves mostly. They're gentle and loving in the rhythm, but are shy with other Meru. Is that why? Are they afraid of it happening again? I feel, Anders said, it is a bit of shame that they were used. But they're so beautiful and unique. They have hair all over. Tao giggled when she said this. So since it is further away from the One in the circuit, this world has a sun for light? Tao was curious. It does. If you saw the sun, it means that you visited during the day. They have a period of darkness called night. Tao looked confused. Suddenly, in the middle of the room, a multi-level platform appeared. They're on this level of vibration, Wise Woman said while pointing to the lowest platform. The bottom tier expanded, showing the universe, then just the Milky Way, then a single solar system. This is what their world looks like on their level of vibration. Their sun is at the center. As the planet revolves around it, the same side isn't always facing the sun. As it also revolves around its sun, it has different seasons. So it has night and day, and has cold and hot. Tao's head hurt. When we go there. So we slow down too? A bit. We have choices. So is that why Aaron was able to walk through the trees and I crushed some? It was probably inexperience, Anders said. On some worlds, there is dark energy. Dark energy will draw you down more. It would have made the humans angry, not frightened. It would have made them strike out at you despite the size difference. Does this darkness harm the humans? It can. It causes them to hurt each other, even kill. It even uses the animals to harm. Tao felt sick. Is that why we fight with love and light? Some, like Anders, try. It is difficult work, but it is not for the young or the faint to do it. A tear fell down the dark blue eyes of Tao. Anders put his hand on her cheek. If dark energy comes to the human world, it would be disastrous. They seem so helpless. I want to help. Tao bowed her head, noticing the caillou berry scone she had barely touched. First, finish your scone, then your lessons, Wise Woman said. Tao finished in silence. Anders and Wise Woman talked of the time they had their first lessons and their excitement at the journey she was taking. They mentioned how they didn't think that she would choose a warrior's path. As a child, she seemed more of an observer, like her friend Tyrus. Once they realized they weren't going to cheer her up and seeing her discomfort at the day's conversation, Wise Woman wished her well and sent her on her way. Tal walked slowly home as she thought about the dark energy harming beings in other worlds. In her mind, she heard a warning from Wise Woman that thinking of it can bring it to you. To keep it at bay, one must only think of love and light. Tal thought of her mother waiting for her and her little sister. In her mind, she saw her dancing with anticipation at Tao's return. As she walked up the path to her family home, she felt her sister's love touch her heart. From the doorway, her sister ran to her, her blue hair flying behind her. Tao opened her arms, allowing her sister to jump into them. Tao, she exclaimed. Tao held her tight, hugging her close. Show me what you did today, she demanded excitedly. Tao thought about the images of Erin and her first portal. She let her sister see and feel how she felt, the dizziness, the excitement, the curiosity. Her sister giggled at the sound of a scream. She let her see Tyrus greeting her on a return and the stop at Wise Woman's cottage. She didn't let her hear the conversation, just let her taste the scone. Lucky, Graham didn't give me a scone when she visited today. Show me your day, Rika, Tao said to her sister. The images were clear, playing in the stream, Wise Woman's visit, the games they played, and helping her mother with dinner. Lentil and herb stew, Tao said. Did you save me some? They both giggled. She put Rika on the floor and then looked up at her mother's weary face. She could see the concern for her. It's all good, Ma, she said. She knew that a piece of her mother was always with her wherever she went. Wise Woman knows you're too young for a warrior clan, she said. My first lesson was today, so obviously I'm not. Too young to be a warrior, not an apprentice. She felt her mother's worry and pride at the same time. She walked to her mother, wrapped her in a tight hug, then whispered in her ear, I hope you save me some stew. Mary pushed her away, then gripped her arms to hold her close. A smile teased at her lips. Be careful, or next time I'll let your sister eat it all. With that, Rika clapped excitedly. The rest of the time before sleep was spent playing games, planning for the next day, and meditating to connect to the community. The next day, Tao left the cottage for her lessons. As usual, Tyrus waited for her at her cottage door. On the way to the lesson area, she told Tyrus of her conversation with her grandmother and her concern for humans. I never knew, Tyrus said, what your father died fighting for. They don't tell us. The reason is what I told you. If you know about it and think about it, you can make it come to you. They don't want it here. Try to tell a little not to think about something, and that's all they think about. Good point. So how do we stop it? I guess I'm going to find out. Just as she finished speaking, Erin appeared in front of them, causing them both to jump. You should be more aware, more connected, Erin scolded. Always be ready for any being to appear around you. Tao only nodded, realizing that they were disconnected themselves from the community to talk about forbidden things. It took a moment to find you too. Now, we will learn to open a portal in time as well as space. Concentrate on what you saw yesterday. Tao closed her eyes, opened herself more, and imagined herself standing closer to the slope. Very good. She opened her eyes in time to see her portal from the day before close. She was looking back toward the trees. She heard a noise come from behind her, so she turned. She watched the humans coming up the slope. There were 3 of them, and they all appeared larger than the one she had seen in her yesterday. She recognized them as full-grown, although they weren't as tall as her hip. The first one was taller than the other 2, had more hair on his face, and carried a carved branch of some kind. His hair was the color of Tyrus, but had lighter colors in it. The one behind him had hair on his face also, but it was dark. His skin was darker than the first, and darker than the two littles had been. The third had reddish hair and no facial hair. They stopped at the top of the hill in front of her. The first one bent at the waist. She looked at Aaron, who instructed her to open. When she did, she felt they had no ill intent. The first one with the staff straightened to look up at her. It opened its mouth and language came out. She opened herself more to try to understand. We welcome you giants to our village. We welcome your help and protection. With that, all three bowed. Aaron stepped forward. She knelt on one knee to be closer to the beings, signaling for Tao to do the same. Tao did, resting her elbow on her knee. We are sorry that our children were frightened of you, but they had never seen one of you before. We know we can be frightening to littles, Aaron said. I brought another with me today to show her of your world. As you have instructed us, we will not go close to the village so as not to damage it or frighten anyone. May we help you with anything today? We only seek to gather wood from your forest. Tao was confused as she wasn't aware of any Meru owning anything on her world or another world. She let herself open with a little more and realized that Aaron was translating the nuances for her in her mind. Since this is where they usually opened a portal in this region, the humans assumed it was where they lived. Tao couldn't help herself. She thought of all of the dead trees stacked on one side of the clearing just outside of the forest. As she imagined it, it came to be. The smaller branches piled in another area near the stack of dead trees. She felt a little reprimand from Aaron. In her mind, she heard her say that humans need to fend for themselves. We should have only given them permission to enter the forest. All three humans fell to their knees, bending at the waist. They placed their foreheads on the ground. Aaron put a hand on Tao's arm, signaling that it was time they leave. Once on the other side of the portal, Tao questioned Aaron about the reprimand. But if we have the ability to give them what they need, why don't we? It doesn't teach them to fend for themselves. Also, only give them what they ask for and no more. Tao sighed. If you give your sister everything she wants, what happens? Tao thought about it. She doesn't learn to do for herself. She must learn to clean herself up and connect with the rhythm without help, but she won't be able to do it when she gets older. Exactly. If you give the humans everything, they never learn to ask for what they need from the one. They don't learn to do it on their own, and they get lazy. They will die if you give them everything. If you really love them, you will let them do for themselves. Tao sighed. So much to learn, she said aloud. Tao's training with Aaron seemed to last forever. She learned to feel the energy of different worlds, learning that each world had its own soul. The world with the humans was named Mari. She was a gentle soul, nurturing her inhabitants with water and plants. Tao loved Mari in her gentle, nurturing way. She also learned to appreciate the humans on Mari as well as the other animals. She learned that not all humans are the same. Some ask for help with building projects and knowledge of farming. She went to other parts of Mari. One place the humans called Puhuitin Suyu asked the Meru to help them build square-stepped buildings they called pyramids. At first, the steps were made for the Meru to ascend only. When the Meru realized that the humans needed to climb to the top for maintenance and other reasons, smaller steps were included on each side. The humans used them to appreciate the sun and the sky. Sometimes they were used for energy, and other times they were used to bury the dead. Other parts of Mari, humans asked them to build pyramids too, but they were smoother. Here they were mostly used for energy, for the cities they built. Tao was amazed at the complex cities that the humans built with the aid of the Meru. She also found that her skill with magic and moving objects by thought came in handy when she was working with the humans. At times she would read the minds of the humans, and other times the rhythm would help her understand what they need.
To be continued.
Well, since I have to go to work, um, I will end this video for now.